Further, we can start off our first sessions with Chris Kutarna, co-author of Age of Discovery, Navigating the Risks and Rewards of Our New Renaissance. I do love alliteration. Oh, that's brilliant. Chris is here to open our minds to the future. So please welcome him to the stage. Chris, come and join us.
Thank you, Anne. Thank you so much. Morning, everyone. I'm Chris. For the next 45, 50 minutes, I'm going to tell you the future. But you got to admit, it's a pretty good trick. Full confession, before we get started, I'm not from the future, actually. This is where I'm from, Regina, Saskatchewan, Canada. And now, Canada, because of its northern orientation, we are a little bit closer to the future. We have this thing called the interwebs, and it's awesome. But I can't tell you about that yet. So no, I very definitely am not from the future. I've never been there. But I do know an awful lot about it. And you believe me, because I'm standing on stage, I'm waving my arms around importantly, I've got PowerPoint, but most importantly, I'm wearing a t-shirt. And so subconsciously, and I can hear it, subconsciously you're telling myself, oh my, this Chris guy. I mean, he must be so busy thinking deep and disruptive thoughts that he doesn't even have time for mundane considerations like, what would it be appropriate to wear on stage today? And you would be right. But the other reason I'm wearing a t-shirt is that it's a lot hotter in the future, and I'm just preparing my body for that. But the most important reason you should believe me when I say I can tell you the future is that I know the secret. And when you know the secret, the future suddenly flips from something that seems very far away, very unfamiliar, to something that seems very close and very familiar. And this morning, I'm going to share the secret with you, which is great. You're going to be able to impress all of your friends at cocktail parties with this one. And maybe more importantly, when surprise hits in your own life, and there's always going to be surprises, you're not going to be one of the people who freezes, who hesitates. You're going to be one of those who leans in, who puts their hands on the tiller and steers the consequences in a positive direction for yourself, for your businesses, for your family, for your community. So that's what I'm offering. Does that sound pretty good? Does it sound maybe too good to be true? Getting a few nods. All right. So what's the one question we should always ask someone when they offer us something that sounds too good to be true? Anyone? Evidence. Evidence. What else? What else? Well, and it's a festival, not a conference. We can have fun. What's the catch? Thank you. There's a catch. And I didn't even pay her. That was great. Good teamwork. All right. There's a catch. Now, the catch is, having discovered this secret, I very quickly realized that it's too dangerous, right? So long as only a few people know it, we're all at risk. Okay, so that's why I'm here this morning, sharing it with you instead of in the city of London making some trades. Although, the day is young, so we'll see. But I'm going to share this secret with you. And then the deal is, you're not going to hoard it, you're going to pay it forward. So if you're on Twitter, you're going to tweet it. If you're on email, you're going to email it. But you can't hold on to it. You got to help me make it much less of a secret. Okay, that's the deal. Are we all right with that? Okay. Are we ready? The secret is, and now before I show you, I'm just curious, who else here already knows the future? Anyone? I mean, when you think of the future, what's the first image? What's the first idea that comes to mind? Anyone? You can just shout it out. Anyone? It's a festival. It's not a conference. Hoverboards. Oh, that's a good one. That's a good one. Hoverboards. Anyone else? First thing that comes to mind when you think of the future. Yes. Electric planes. Electric planes. Yeah. And we just have solar craft now flying around. Anyone else? One more. Vision of the future. Flying cars. Oh, I love that one. Okay. Now this is good, and thank you for that. You're all wrong. No. But what it does reveal is, see, in society, we talk about the future a lot. And we've got a lot of mistaken ideas about the future. We've got some myths. And so the first thing we need to do before we can hear the secret, before we can see the future more clearly, is we've got to dispel a couple of big myths that cloud our understanding. All right, so we're going to do that first, and then I promise you, this is not an escape tactic. In about 10 minutes, I am going to tell you the secret. Okay. But to help me explode these myths, I'm going to recruit my friend, Kelvin. Kelvin is another guy who does a lot of thinking about the future. And here's an example. One day he's walking through the snow, so it must be in Canada. His friend says, "Hey, another decade's coming up." And Kelvin, "Yeah, big deal. Where are the flying cars? Where are the moon colonies? Where are the personal robots, etc.? Right? Where are the rocket packs?" And he says, "I mean, look at this. We've still got weather. Give me a break." Okay, so Kelvin has just made two big mistakes in his thinking about the future. Well, actually three. Number one, he's not wearing a t-shirt. But number two, his vision of the future is too linear. It's too unimaginative. And that's not something Kelvin often gets accused of. But when he thinks about the future, it's true. And the perfect example, and thank you for this example, Anne, is flying cars, right? Where are the flying cars? The perfect example of how unimaginative our thinking about the future can sometimes be, all right? Better question, if you really want to see the future, is ask yourself, where did this idea of flying cars come from anyway? And the answer is interesting. It came from America in the 1950s. In the 1950s, two big changes happened in people's lives. Everyone started to drive around in cars, and lots of people started to ride around in airplanes. And in that moment, these two big changes, the coolest, the most disruptive, awesomest, futuristic thing that people could imagine was that one day their cars would be able to fly too. Cars and planes, flying cars. It's a perfect example of how lazy, how unimaginative our ideas about the future can sometimes be. Now, I'm going to give you an example of a really good, non-linear, really imaginative prediction of the future. All right. There will be a day, not far distant, when you will be able to conduct business, study, explore the world and its cultures, call up any great entertainment, make friends, attend neighborhood markets, and show pictures to distant relatives without leaving your desk or armchair. Bill Gates, 1995. And what's amazing about this prediction is not just how right Bill Gates was. And by the way, Bill Gates is someone who already knows the secret that you're about to learn. But what's really amazing about it is how hard it is for us, sitting and standing here today, to even remember the world in which none of that was possible. To even remember when, it took a trip to the public library to look up that the capital of Mozambique is Or go to the library, look it up. Or that, if you wanted to share your vacation photos with your friends, that the only way to do that was to order a second set of prints and mail them. I mean, the distance we feel from the way things were and the way things are now, that's the originality, the creativity that will always defeat simple, linear ideas about the future, okay? So, the future, not linear. Scrub that myth from your head. Second big myth that Kelvin is locked in is that the future is some kind of technological utopia. That the future is the time when technology has solved all of our problems. And we can blame this myth on this guy right here, Thomas Edison. He's a famous inventor in the 19th, 20th century. Does anybody know what Thomas Edison's most important invention was? Light bulb is his most famous. Do you want the microphone? Is that? You're exactly right. Thomas Edison's most important invention was the method of invention itself, which he pioneered in his research lab, Menlo Park, which was really the world's first industrial research lab. And what he did at Menlo Park was turn invention from something that sort of looked like this to something that looked like this. He professionalized it. He industrialized it. He turned it into this, what's the word? He turned it into this cycle from basic research to the development of applications to the commercialization of those applications and funneling some of the profits back into basic research to keep that cycle going again. And it proved so successful that over the 20th century, we built our whole knowledge economies into these innovation engines. We shaped our economies around this one idea. And it also shaped our expectations, our ideas about technology, so that today we're locked into this expectation that it will always deliver us something that is cheaper, faster, better, more responsive than what we had before against whatever obstacles reality is going to throw up. That's what we expect from our technology. Now, in my day job, when I'm not, on a stage, in a t-shirt, sharing dangerous secrets, I'm a fellow at the Oxford Martin School, University of Oxford. And this is basically over 300 researchers who are working together to tackle the big challenges humanity faces in the 21st century. There's a lot of really breakthrough stuff going on there. So, if I wanted to, I could stand here this morning and fill an hour just spinning a techno-optimistic story about where we're headed. It would all be true. I'd tell you about breakthroughs in nanomedicine, in synthetic biology, advanced photovoltaics, artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, getting a lot better at that, quantum mechanics, and on and on and on for an hour. I'm not going to tell you those things. And the reason is that if I do that, I'm doing you a disservice. Because I'd just be reinforcing this myth that technology is going to one day solve all of our problems. That's not how technology works, how it's ever worked. Technology does not eliminate humanity's problems. The best it can do is substitute our present problems with a new one. This is true for all technologies, all disciplines, all domains, all time periods. So I'll give you a familiar example from today. Energy. Fossil fuels have solved one of the biggest problems that human civilization has always faced, which is where do we get the energy for our growth? And it's been really good in solving that problem. So good that it created another one. It's all very familiar to us today, which is increasing carbon concentrations in the atmosphere from just using this solution everywhere. But that's all right. You know, science, technology, we go away and we say, you know, we can find a solution to that problem. And we work at it, and we do find a solution. It's called renewable energy. Great. Carbon pollution solved. But, and this is the key, the same time as solving that problem, renewables have introduced two new problems, which actually fossil fuels had solved really nicely. The first is, how are we going to store energy? Now, for fossil fuels, it's easy. It's in the chemical bonds of the organic molecules themselves. But for renewables, we have to use batteries, and that, you know, creates a whole slew of other problems. The other big problem that renewables have introduced is how are we going to concentrate energy so that it can do explosive work, like drive our cars and power our airplanes and launch our shuttles into space. And we're making progress on these things, but still a poor substitute for what we had already discovered. And it's not just energy. Take medicine, for example. And right now, modern medicine is advancing so rapidly, and I mean, this is great news. So rapidly that every day that we spend on this earth, medicine is refunding us 4 hours now in improved life expectancy. 4 hours a day. That's how quickly medicine in the developed countries is extending the healthy life of our bodies. It's incredible. But it's created a really big problem, which is that the same medicine has fewer answers to the mental degeneration that more and more of us now live long enough to suffer. And if you're a doctor or a social worker or, you know, dealing with Alzheimer's in your family, you know that this is a giant new problem that we've introduced. So, the future is linear. No. Between yesterday and tomorrow stands us. Right? We are the originality, the creativity that guarantees that this is never going to be a straight line. And the future is a utopia. No. Technology will never absolve us of the responsibility to deal with problems of our own making. So those two ideas cloud a lot of our thinking about the future. And all of us right now, we're just going to scrub them away so that we can see clearly. And now we're ready for the secret. Okay? And in fact, if you've been listening carefully, you already know it. Because when you scrub away the myths in thinking about the future, there's only one idea about the future that's left. And that idea must be true. See, the secret to seeing the future is to recognize that we never arrive there. We only achieve it. We never arrive there. We only achieve it. So let's think about that for a minute. It means, for example, that what we've just been doing the last 20 minutes is exactly backwards, all right? You were never an audience to your future, having someone else explain it to you. Right? You were never a passenger on a train, you know, wondering where one day it might take you. The secret is that whether through our actions or our inactions, right, we are making our future all the time and right now, okay? All the time and right now, we are making our future, which is great. Now, If I were a motivational speaker, I might drop the mic right there. And that'd be great. I'd be like, oh yeah, this is wonderful. I'm going to go forward and create the future that I want for myself. And that would be awesome. The only problem with that is I'm not a motivational speaker. I'm not really a speaker either, except for the T-shirt. I'm an author, and I'm a political scientist. And so, like any good political scientist who has one good idea, I wrote a book about it. It came out a couple weeks ago with my co-author, who's director of the Martin School, Ian. It's really touched a nerve with people, I think. Sales are going pretty well, so that's good. Please do buy it. And what we try to do in the book is take this secret and build it into something much more substantial. And what the book says is, look, if it really is true that the future is what we make out of the present, then what if we could find a parallel moment in the past, a time of similar circumstances, similar stresses, and look at what we made of it then? Now, that might not tell us exactly what's going to happen next, because history doesn't simply repeat. But it would help to broaden our imagination about what might happen next. And in a time of rapid change and upheaval and so much confusion about just what is going on in the world today, my God, have you seen these headlines? That alone would already be tremendously, tremendously useful. So to foresee the future, we found ourselves looking to the past for that wisdom, for that parallel. And really the only question was, where in the past should we look for the best wisdom for this moment we live in now? Should we look to ancient Egypt, maybe ancient Greece, the Industrial Revolution? Maybe. The European Renaissance. And after a lot of hard work and research, so we've done the hard work for you, settled upon the European Renaissance. We said, if we're going to foresee the future by looking to the past, then this is the past that we're going to consult. Because the biggest forces that are shaping and upending our own lives today also shaped and upended theirs 500 years ago. And I'll give the long version, I'll leave it for the book, but just very briefly to skim over the biggest parallels. The first is new maps. Pick up any political or economic map of the world from 1985 and try to explain contemporary trade flows or financial flows or migrant flows, and you just can't. Because that map, written before the fall of the Berlin Wall, before the end of the Cold War, before the founding of the WTO and China's emergence from autarky to join the global economic system, before waves of democratization through Latin America, through sub-Saharan Africa, the end of apartheid, Southeast Asia. That map from 1985 just does not describe the world as we understand it today. And it was the same 500 years ago. In 1450, this was the best picture of the world that Europe had access to. And this picture was already over 1,000 years old. It had been written by Ptolemy in, I guess, about the year 100 AD. To modernize, it's barely recognizable. But within a century, thanks to the voyages of discovery by Christopher Columbus, by Ferdinand Magellan, by Vasco da Gama, Europe had opened and connected the world, had put all its precious resources into global motion. And we recognize this map, Mercator's 1569 map of the world, because it's still the basis of all our maps today. So new maps. And the second is new media. This is Facebook Connections in 2013. This is the most recent one they've got available. I'm sure it's even brighter now. I don't need to go too long into this one. I think we've all heard, we think about internet and digitization. Think about Gutenberg's press. Both shifted human communication in a similar way, right? Catapulted the speed and distance over which ideas could travel, stimulated a flourishing of new content and participation in its creation, and flipped the very economics of idea and information exchange from relative scarcity to radical abundance. So new maps, new media, and a new human condition. It's really interesting that whether you were born in the European Renaissance in Europe or born pretty much anywhere in the world today, the exact same statement would be true, which is that now is the best time in history to be alive. And it's not a boast, it's just the macro facts. You look at the contemporary case, human health. So right now, global average life expectancy worldwide is rising and has risen by more in the past 50 years than in the previous 1,000. More in the past 50 years than in the previous 1,000. Education. There are more people living today, with a higher education degree than all degrees that have ever been awarded in history prior to 1980. That's the new plane, the new human condition that we've been born into, that we're doing business in. And the same thing was true then. As the Black Death subsided and a hardier, younger European population was able to just take advantage, to reap the gains of the maps and the media that they had been born into. So new maps, new media, a new human condition. That's what makes the Renaissance a really great parallel for making sense of the moment we live in now. Okay, so that's great. Thanks for the bit of scholarship, Chris. Practical question is, so what do I do with that? Right? All right, so I understand that there's some parallels to the history to today. But what can I take away? What specific predictions? What wisdom from that moment in history can I carry forward into the present? And I'm happy to get into some specific predictions in the Q&A. We got to leave some good stuff for the Slido. Right here, right now, just briefly, the two big takeaways are hope and trepidation. Hope, because the European Renaissance achieved a flourishing of genius that in many ways we still celebrate 500 years later. And again, it's not just rhetoric. In 1450, Europe lagged behind Asia, behind the Arab world, on most measures of human progress. And by 1550, they were leapfrogging them all and boasted more organizational energy than any civilization in history. Right? And we're on course for the same flourishing now. In fact, it's already underway. I'm happy to give more examples of that later. But trepidation, because in the Renaissance, people very quickly discovered that alongside flourishing genius, there was also a flourishing of risk. That they weren't just connected now, that they were tangled together in ways that were unwelcome and non-optional. So the voyages of discovery spread terrifying new pandemics on both sides of the Atlantic. Venice, which had operated a vast and vastly profitable overland spice supply monopoly from Asia to Europe, shown here, had that monopoly broken and suffered economic shock when Portugal found a sea route to those same spices. And Venice never really recovered. Its economy never really recovered from that shock that they just could not imagine coming. Political extremists seized control of Florence, which was the most liberal, the most educated, the heart of Renaissance Europe. They grabbed its precious art and literature and burned it in a bonfire of the vanities. Because a very charismatic monk who really understood social media fanned this violent anger that a big chunk of the population felt, that their leadership was corrupt, that public institutions weren't helping them to keep up with a rapidly changing world. Inquisitions that attempted to purge Muslim and Jewish populations from Western Europe, attempted to purge foreign influences from public values. You know, stop me if any of these anxieties are starting to sound familiar. And the parallels to our present day vulnerabilities go on and on and on. All right. So, when you wake up tomorrow morning, and you open up the newspaper, or more likely open up your news app, and just start to feel overwhelmed and anxious by the headlines that are just filling this strange age that we live in, I want you to take a step back, just take a deep breath, and recognize that we've been here before. We've been here before. And more importantly, we actually do have a pretty good idea of the moment we're in and of where we're headed. And the predictions we make are not based on fear or anxiety or unimaginative thinking or some kind of techno-optimism. They're grounded in human nature, in our understanding of what we've already done in similar situations, under similar stresses. But most importantly, when those headlines hit and the anxiety threatens to overwhelm, remember the secret, right? We never arrive to the future. We only achieve it. And I don't think it's any accident that the luminaries of the Renaissance, they all wrote and created art about this secret. They were trying to tell their time there is no greater harm than that of time wasted. That people of accomplishment rarely sit back and let things happen to them. They go out and happen to things. That everything has converged for your greatness, Machiavelli told the princes of Italy. The rest, well, you got to do that yourself. See, they all understood the moment they were in was this contest between forces of flourishing genius and forces of flourishing risk. And the future will be determined by which of those forces proved the greater, but also that their personal lives would form part of that proof. I'm going to end on this. This is my favorite work of art from the Renaissance, Michelangelo's David. David and Goliath was a familiar Old Testament story at the time Michelangelo carved it, 1504. It's about a young warrior who, in true underdog fashion, he defeats a giant foe in single combat that shapes the course of a wider war. And because it was so familiar, it must have caused a great deal of confusion for the crowd in Florence's central square that was present for its unveiling. Because he doesn't show David sort of standing atop his slain foe. You know, it's usually some severed head in one hand. He didn't show that. He shows him alone, you know, at the ready. His brows are furrowed, his neck is tensed, his eyes are, you know, focused determinedly on some distant point. And then the audience, you know, had that aha, and they saw what Michelangelo had done, because he was giving them David, not in his moment of victory, but in his moment of decision, right? In that moment between recognizing what he must do to shape the wider war and summoning the courage to do it. And those people in the square, they knew that moment. They were most certainly in it, especially in the heart of Florence. They were in that moment. And I think we're in it too. So ladies and gentlemen, I submit to you, this is the Second Renaissance. Its legacy, its future is in all of our hands. And Goliath is waiting. Thank you very much.